It's funny how some people measure worth by the number of years spent in school. That was always the way my sister-in-law, Susanna, viewed the world. To her, education was the only thing that mattered. She often poked fun at me for being a high school dropout. She couldn't understand how someone without a degree could be successful. I remember her mocking me at every opportunity, acting as if I was beneath her. My name is Rosalind, and I'm a 28-year-old CEO of a successful IT company. The irony? I met my husband Clifton, Susanna's brother, at a business event, something Susanna never thought someone like me could attend, let alone excel in. Clifton and I now live in a condo, both of us working full-time jobs. We share the housework, with whoever has the time taking care of it. But because I often get home late, Clifton handles most of it. He never complains. He's always encouraging me, telling me he's proud of what I've achieved. Being married to Clifton felt like a blessing. I had everything: success, a supportive husband, and a peaceful life. Everything was perfect, except for Susanna. From the first time we met, Susanna made it clear she didn't think I was good enough for her brother. She seemed obsessed with my education, or lack thereof. The first thing she ever said to me was, "What's your highest level of education?" That was her way of sizing me up, of putting me in a box. I wasn't prepared for her directness and didn't want to start our relationship off with an argument, so I answered honestly, "I dropped out of high school." That's when the sneer spread across her face, and I could tell she had already formed her opinion about me. "A dropout?" she said, laughing as if it were the punchline to a joke. "Why would my brother marry someone so uneducated?" She said it right in front of me, not even attempting to hide her disdain. Clifton, ever the peacemaker, jumped in. "Susanna, stop it. Education isn't everything. Rosalind built her company from scratch. That takes more than a diploma." Susanna waved him off, continuing to belittle me. "People who drop out of school are the ones who think they can start companies and fail miserably. Your company will probably go under any day now," she said, with no hesitation. Clifton was livid, ready to argue, but I stopped him. I'd faced similar criticisms before when starting my business, and I had learned not to let it get under my skin. I smiled at Susanna and said, "It's okay, Clifton. I can handle it." In that moment, I made a silent vow to prove her wrong. I'd show her that success isn't defined by degrees, but by determination and resilience. Little did I know that Susanna's remarks weren't a one-time thing. They became a regular occurrence. Every time she visited, she'd make it a point to criticize me, mock my achievements, and boast about her own education. Her visits became something I dreaded. She'd show up unannounced, look around our home with disdain, and ask, "Do you even do housework, Rosalind?" No matter how hard Clifton and I worked to maintain our household, she found ways to criticize. "My poor brother," she'd sigh. "Having to live with someone like you must be tough." She would imply that because I was a dropout, I was incompetent. Not just in my professional life, but in every aspect of life, including being a wife. She even went so far as to suggest that I should quit my company and become a stay-at-home wife, because that was all she thought I was good for. I'd keep my cool, brushing off her comments, but internally, I was seething. It was one thing for her to judge my education, but another to question my worth as a wife. I had built my company from the ground up, and my employees respected me. Despite Susanna's endless insults, I kept my head high, but every jab made me more determined to prove her wrong. She had no idea what it was like to hustle, to work late into the night, to make tough decisions that could either make or break a company. She had never experienced that kind of pressure. She lived in a bubble where her degree was supposed to guarantee her success, but she didn't understand that the real world didn't work that way. Then one day, she dropped a bombshell. Susanna was getting married. When Susanna announced her engagement, I thought maybe things would finally change. "Oh, you're getting married?" I asked, genuinely trying to be happy for her. "Yes," she said, beaming with pride. "My fiancé is a Harvard graduate and works at a very successful company." I congratulated her, but deep down, I wondered if she had chosen her partner based solely on his academic credentials. "What does he do?" I asked, trying to be polite. "He's in IT," she replied. "Working at a rapidly growing company with a very competent female CEO. You know, someone who actually graduated. Her eyes flicked toward me, the insult clear. It was almost laughable how much weight she put on education, but I let it slide. I'm happy for you, I said, genuinely wishing her well, even though she had just insulted me again. The weeks leading up to her wedding were unbearable. Susanna visited more often than usual, flaunting her engagement and making snide comments about how I, the dropout, should be grateful to even attend her wedding. Then one day, she made a shocking request. Please, don't come to my wedding, she said, as if it were a reasonable request. I was taken aback. What do you mean? I asked, genuinely confused. If my fiancé's family finds out you're a dropout, it could ruin everything, she explained. I don't want to risk the engagement being called off. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there in disbelief, unsure of how to respond. The audacity of her request left me speechless. Did she really think her engagement would be jeopardized by my lack of formal education? It was absurd. I wanted to tell her off, to explain that her shallow view of the world was flawed, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I simply nodded and said, Fine, I won't go. For the next few days, I debated whether I should really skip the wedding. Clifton, on the other hand, was furious. Your family, he said. It's ridiculous for her to ask you not to come. You're going, and that's final. I could see how much this was bothering him. He didn't want his sister's pettiness to ruin the day. So despite my reservations, I decided to attend. On the day of the wedding, I dressed in my best, determined to hold my head high. But as soon as I arrived at the venue, Susanna rushed over, her face twisted with anger. Why are you here? She demanded, her voice low but filled with venom. I told you not to come. I remained calm, refusing to let her rattle me. Clifton wanted me here, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Just as she was about to argue, the groom's parents approached. Ah, CEO Rosalind, it's so good to see you, they said, bowing slightly. Susanna's face turned pale. She looked from me to them, her confusion evident. CEO? What's going on? She stammered, clearly caught off guard. I smiled politely and said, Your husband works for me. I'm the CEO of his company. Susanna's mouth dropped open, unable to comprehend the situation. The look on Susanna's face was priceless. She had spent months ridiculing me, only to find out that her soon-to-be husband worked for the very company I owned. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She stared at me, speechless, trying to process the information. No, that can't be true, she muttered, shaking her head. There's no way. But before she could say anything else, her fiancé Victor walked over. Ah, boss, I didn't expect to see you here, he said with a smile, bowing his head in respect. Thank you for coming. The color drained from Susanna's face as the reality of the situation finally sank in. Victor had called me boss, confirming that I was, indeed, the CEO of the company where he worked. Susanna was flustered, unsure of how to react. She had spent so long looking down on me, and now the tables had turned. It's a small world, isn't it? I said, trying to keep the situation from escalating. Congratulations on your wedding, Victor. I'm happy to be here. Susanna was at a loss for words, her earlier arrogance completely shattered. She couldn't look me in the eye, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. For the first time, she realized that education wasn't the only measure of success. For the rest of the wedding, Susanna avoided me. Her face remained tense, and I could see the embarrassment written all over it. When she walked down the aisle, her usually composed demeanor faltered. She tripped slightly, making the moment awkward for her, though she quickly recovered. Victor noticed her discomfort and whispered, What's wrong with you today? Susanna mumbled something, but I could tell she was shaken by the events. As I sat through the ceremony, I couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and satisfaction. After months of enduring her insults, her holier-than-thou attitude had finally crumbled. During the reception, she tried to stay as far away from me as possible, while her husband occasionally came over to check on me. I hope you're enjoying yourself, boss, he said, his face showing genuine warmth. I smiled politely and responded, Yes, thank you, Victor. It's a lovely wedding. Susanna, overhearing the exchange, finally worked up the courage to approach me. Her face still held traces of humiliation, but there was a new expression, one I hadn't seen from her before. I didn't know, she stammered. I didn't realize you were the CEO, of all people. I gave her a tight smile, not wanting to dwell on her past behavior. It's fine, I said, though the tension between us remained palpable. She wasn't used to being the one in a vulnerable position, and it was clear she didn't know how to handle it. After that day, Susanna's attitude toward me changed completely. It was as if she had flipped a switch. The snide remarks stopped, and instead she began complimenting me. Awkwardly at first, but it was a noticeable shift. You're a CEO while balancing your home life, she said one afternoon when she visited Clifton and me. That's incredible. I could tell she was forcing the words out, but at least she was trying. I responded with a simple, "Thank you." But deep down, I could feel the tension bubbling. I didn't want her admiration now that she knew I was successful. Where was that respect before? Still, it was better than being belittled at every turn. Susanna even started asking for advice. "How did you manage to build such a successful company?" she inquired one day, her voice almost desperate. "I've been thinking about starting my own business too." I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at her sudden interest in entrepreneurship. It was ironic. She had mocked me for being a dropout, and now she wanted to follow in my footsteps. "It takes a lot of hard work," I replied, "and perseverance. It's not something that happens overnight." Susanna nodded eagerly, hanging on my every word. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was determined to prove that if I could do it, she could too. But I knew better. Success wasn't something you could fake, and Susanna didn't have the grit for it. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself, curious to see how things would play out. Over the next few months, Susanna made several attempts to start her own business. She launched a website, held meetings with potential clients, and tried to build her brand. But it wasn't long before cracks started to show. Her ideas lacked focus, and she struggled to manage the day-to-day operations. I could see her frustration growing with each passing day, though she refused to admit it. Then one day, out of the blue, she gave up. "I'm done," she confessed to Clifton during a family dinner. "Starting a business is harder than I thought. I don't know how you do it, Rosalind." There was a bitterness in her voice, though she tried to mask it with a smile. I didn't gloat, but a part of me felt vindicated. She had underestimated what it took to build and run a successful company. "It's not for everyone," I said diplomatically, not wanting to rub salt in the wound. But Susanna wasn't ready to give up just yet. A few weeks later, she came to me with another request, this time asking if she could work for my company. "I think it would be a great opportunity," she said, her voice almost pleading. "I could learn from you, and I've always admired what you've built." Her sudden change in tone was laughable. This was the same woman who had once sneered at the idea of working under a dropout CEO. And now, she was asking for a job. I had to bite back my laughter as I considered her request. Part of me wanted to say no on principle. After all the things she had said about me, it felt like poetic justice to reject her. But instead, I decided to hear her out. "What qualifications do you have?" I asked, my tone neutral. Susanna seemed caught off guard by the question. "Well, I graduated from a prestigious university," she began, her voice uncertain, "and I took a few business courses." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "Anything else?" I pressed. Susanna hesitated, clearly not expecting to be grilled like this. I'm good at organizing things," she said weakly. It was obvious that she had no real experience or skills that would benefit my company. I sighed inwardly. "Susanna, running a company isn't about what school you went to. It's about what you can bring to the table, and right now, I'm not seeing anything that would make me want to hire you." Her face fell, and I could see the disappointment in her eyes. "But I have a degree," she protested, as if that was the only thing that mattered. "That's not enough," I replied firmly. "We hire based on ability, not education." Susanna's face turned red with frustration. "You're rejecting me?" she asked, incredulous. "After everything I've done?" I couldn't help but chuckle at her audacity. Yes, Susanna, I'm rejecting you. The rejection hit her hard. She had never imagined being turned down by someone she had spent so long looking down on. I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface as she tried to compose herself. I can't believe this, she muttered, more to herself than to me. You're really not going to hire me? I shook my head. No, I'm not. You're not qualified for the job, and I don't hire based on family ties. Susanna was livid. She stormed out of my office, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had spent so much time belittling me that it was almost poetic justice for her to experience this moment. After that, Susanna stopped asking me for favors. She no longer bragged about her education, and her visits to our home became less frequent. Clifton noticed the change in her attitude and commented on it one evening as we sat together. I think Susanna's finally starting to realize that the world doesn't revolve around degrees, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I nodded, though I knew it was more than that. Susanna's pride had been shattered, and she was struggling to rebuild herself. In the months that followed, she tried to find other jobs, but without any real qualifications or experience, she faced rejection after rejection. It wasn't long before she gave up on her career ambitions altogether and decided to become a housewife. But even that wasn't easy for her. Susanna had never been one to take care of household responsibilities. She had always relied on others, first her parents, then Victor. But now, as a full-time housewife, she found herself floundering. She couldn't cook, struggled with laundry, and often made a mess of things. Victor, who had been patient at first, started to lose his temper. You can't even cook a simple meal, he said one evening, clearly frustrated. What are you doing all day? Susanna tried to defend herself, but it was clear she was in over her head. She wasn't used to being in a position where she had to take care of things on her own. Her friends who had once admired her for graduating from a prestigious university now pitied her. You went to college and now you're just a housewife? They would say, their words dripping with condescension. It must have been a huge blow to her pride. Susanna became more withdrawn, her confidence shattered. She rarely left the house, and when she did, she seemed a shadow of her former self. On the other hand, things were going better than ever for me. My company was growing. I had more free time to spend with Clifton, and I'd even started helping out more around the house. Susanna's constant presence was no longer a source of stress for me, and I found myself enjoying the peace and quiet. Life was good, and I couldn't help but feel that things had finally